Both Mark Cavanaugh and I are looking forward to the evening, the next couple hours. Some of you might have had a pretty long day at work today, so we admire you deeply and coming here for the 6 p.m. to night shift for the MBA program. But we're delighted to be here. This is our 4th year, I think, in a row having done this. And every year we learn more things about how the adoption curve influences real markets, real customers, real product adoptions by real people. And so today what we're going to be focusing on is really doing what we call an executive session, kind of a 2-hour session. We'll have some Q&A at the end. And the title really is this idea about strategic marketing of breakthrough products and services. But the more important part is actually the subtitle, developing strategy, real strategy based on the adoption lifecycle principles. And keep in mind that any model is just a model, but we've been working with this together for about 15 years in Jeff's organization at Chasm Institute. And like I said, we learn something new every month, every quarter about how this applies to businesses. I was so intrigued by the list of people we have here in the room today. People from NBC Universal, from Murad, from JP Morgan Chase, from Bank of America, from Consumer Products Land, from Consumer Services. I mean, I think of the 40 people we have here, we probably got 25 different industries. This is really cool. Let me ask a quick question. How many people here are more than halfway through their program? Okay, they're all sitting on the left-hand side here. All right. How about less than halfway through? Okay. This is not a trick question. You probably know the answer to this. Cool. All right. And speaking of questions, if there's a question or clarification that we want to get to, feel free to ask it during the session. But we will leave about 15 or 20 minutes towards the end to really address some of the things that are on your mind. So with that, let's get started. As Professor Shanahan said, the slides will be available as well as the videotape, and we're pleased to do that. Basically, as we think through the kind of the process of where we are and who we are, the kind of work that we do, I'll introduce Mark Cavender first. He works with a lot of software companies, enterprise software, but not restricted to that. What I do, I work on the life science side, storage side, consumer B2B as well as B2C. And what we found is that the life cycle itself has some really interesting implications in a B2B versus a B2C world. And there's actually B2B2C as well, where you're selling to a business who sells to an end customer. How many people in the room would think of themselves in their current career, which may change, right? Because you're not going to be doing one thing for the next 5 or 10 years. How many people are in a B2C business when they think about their work on a regular basis? How many B2C? Okay, about 8 or 9. How about B2B? Okay, great. What's interesting to us is that most of the headlines in the papers are mostly about B2C because that's most of what we can identify with. So you think of Facebook, or you think of Google, or you think of YouTube, or you think of entertainment industries. But a lot of the value in the world, and in Silicon Valley where we work, but also down here in Southern California, is really based on a B2B transaction as well. So what we're going to be bringing to you is some examples, not from just the list here, but really from examples that you have and you're living through as consumers as well, whether it's wearable technologies, whether it's cloud-based applications, whether it's things like laptops that people don't use anymore instead of tablets versus wrist watches and so forth. We're going to get through some examples like that as we go through. So with that, let's jump into a few core concepts. This session tonight is not about books, but we want to make sure you have the newest version. If you have the softcover version, that's the one you get from Amazon, I think. The hardcover limited edition only comes from the publisher, and that's the one we got you here tonight. Reason we wrote this, we didn't really want to write it. It's the 3rd revision over the last 20 years. But we had Stanford and other universities come to us and say, could you please put freaking examples in this book? They didn't really say freaking. Examples in this book that somebody under the age of 28 would recognize. Well, who are these companies? Silicon Graphics and Vertical Net and so forth. And so what we did was pull out all 25 examples, leaving one in there that actually founded our company back in the early 90s, document them, and then put all sorts of new ones in. Salesforce, Google, a whole host of companies, Apple, VMware, Lithium, companies that really are today kind of competing based on the adoption curve. We think we learn something new every 4 to 5 years. That's when we come out with a new book. Mark and I have been involved in the writing of each of these books as it's kind of progressed through. But quite honestly, I think the most readable book we have is really the Chasm book, just because it's so vivid in the examples about what works and what doesn't work. Oh, the other thing is, just like you, we like to live in the real world. Most of our work is based on maybe 15% theory and about 85% practical application. That's where it comes from, the 500 engagements that we've done in the last 15 years. Okay, enough about all that. When we think of companies that you either work with, or see, or read about, or compete against, every company has challenges in going to market. Strategic marketing, go-to-market, the whole path forward, routes to market. And there's at least 3 companies on this list that kind of break my heart. They're actually not clients of ours, these 3, but I'll circle them because they're companies that at one point were incredibly dominant, and somehow, through competitive disadvantage that they got, couldn't quite make the transition to the next paradigm, the next market shift, the next adoption category. Motorola, there's still Motorola products out there, but Motorola's actually been sold to Google, and then Google went on and parceled it out and sold it on to some other. So a great American brand that couldn't make the transition to what? To this. We're going to be talking about this today as really a renewal strategy back that says when you're on this thing called Main Street and you sit there too long and you don't innovate back, something happens to you. Your company becomes a verb. You know what that verb is? It's getting Kodaked. You know what getting Kodak means? Getting Kodak means having brilliant people, amazing patents, a great brand name, and knowing 20 years in advance that your industry is going away and not being able to react to it, and slowly sliding down the right-hand side of this. What's amazing to both Mark and me is that Kodak was not short on brilliant people. In fact, if you look at your smartphone, about 11% of the patent-protected IP on there is Kodak invention today. But they didn't monetize it. They sold those patents off to other companies because they had to raise money for, fire sale, for keeping payroll going and the carpeting on the floor and the lighting in the building. But what we're going to see is that great companies know how to operate in mainstream markets, whether financial companies, business service companies, and others. And they also know when to go back and to renew. And we're going to see that some companies make a struggle about that and aren't able to actually accomplish that. And so if you think of the 3 that I've circled, Nokia, who would have imagined 5 or 6 years ago that brand disappeared 2 months ago. The Lumia is still out there, but that's Microsoft Lumia now. The Nokia brand name is gone from the business. And Sony, who should have owned portable music when you think of the digital transition from analog? The Walkman had an 85% market share at some points in analog. Who the hell are these guys at Apple to have the audacity to now have their own 85% in music and portable digital music? So these things are pretty harsh treatments in the marketplace. Others, even like Facebook. Today, they've got 1.2 billion users. They still haven't fully understood or figured out how to monetize that, right? Still a challenge to do around that. And so what we're going to be doing as we talk through the process is really 4 specific kind of subsets that Mark and I will cover. I'll be doing the first 35 to 40 minutes, and Mark will do the second 45, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. The first one is a topic that's really near and dear to our hearts. And that's what we call models for building a common vocabulary. What is that? Can you imagine in a company how powerful it is when the executive team and the product management team and the product all have the same language of speaking? Is there a danger that if some people have different definitions of what a target segment is, or what a value proposition is, or what a market is, or what a positioning statement is, you wouldn't believe how many companies we see that if you interview them separately, different people in different corners of the office, they give you a very different story about what a segment is. How can you have one strategy, a unified one, if you have different vocabulary? So we're going to hit some core points around vocabulary. And then we're going to talk about, as a product manager, or a strategy manager, or a market manager, what are those options that you have for really going to market? Mark will take a mobile phone industry case that I think is a really intriguing one. And then we're going to also talk about innovation along the way as well, and how this actually changes across the product category lifecycle. So let's put a foundational piece in place, shall we? Most of you have seen this curve before. This is not new to you. It's called the technology adoption lifecycle. What you have in front of you that we dropped off just a few minutes ago is what we call the executive cheat sheet. Okay? It's a one-pager. It doesn't mean you don't need to read the book. But what it does mean is that this gives you a highlight of a paragraph for each one of the stages. But some of this you already know. What is important is what's underlined under each stage, which is here's some things that are warnings, kind of like a warning on the side of the cigarette pack. These are warnings at the side of each stage that says, if you're in bowling alley, broad sales motions will fail. Huh? What that really says is that if you're over here in this area that we call segment-specific market strategy, segments defined by customers who see themselves having similar problems, similar reference points, that if you go into a market that's really segmented in the bowling alley, and you do what we call, it's a very technical term, you ready for this? Spray and pray. Spray and pray means launch it. We don't know who's going to buy it, but if they have $5,000 in a pulse, we call them a customer. That's a spray and pray strategy. Turns out that later, in what we call tornado, it may not be so bad to do spray and pray, a very broad market presence. But here it requires some discipline and some focus to really make it work for the business model that we're going to describe. And so what this is merely a one-pager that kind of reminds us about what these different stages are about. But let's first talk about if you want to make numbers in your business. And I saw on the list we have people who are on the market side, marketing manager, director of engineering, senior account executives, financial advisors, etc. Most of you care about your company being profitable. That would be a kind of a nice habit to get into for most companies. And it turns out there's very little profit in the early market. It doesn't mean you should avoid it, but over here the numbers are pretty daunting. The actual number of customers that reside in the early market, around 2 to 5% of what we're going to call the techies, and another 5 to 8% of what we call the visionaries. These are all what we call pre-chasm. Is your company going to make money, profitable money, not just rough money, by just targeting the early adopters? Is that a great way to go? Yeah, that's a scary question. Because there's companies that we've seen, and categories we've seen, that have taken so long to cross that the company didn't have enough venture money to actually fund themselves into development mode. In fact, there's some technologies that have been sitting in the early market for 25 darn years and still hadn't gotten across. Right now we're seeing a little bit of movement in AI, artificial intelligence. A lot of chatter, a lot of talk, a lot of conferences, a lot of books, but not that much application of AI in the normal marketplace over here. Now we're seeing it slowly come across, and we'll describe how that's occurring. But is it possible for a technology to be in the early market for 20 years and never find profitable segments to go after? Yeah. In fact, I'll give you a little hint. Whenever a consultant says, is it possible? It usually is. Okay, that's kind of what I'm getting at. So this is about 10% or thereabouts in the market. These people, we need them. If you're coming out with breakthrough new cloud software, or the Apple wristwatch and other wearable technology, or 3D printing, one of the clients that I'm working with right now, we need these people, but man, be careful, because they will not get you to where you need to get to if this is all you have. This is a stepping stone along the way, the visionaries and the technology enthusiasts. How many people in this room consider themselves, in many cases around technology, as to the left of the chasm? They're kind of the innovators, the early adopters. How many people in the room would say they're that? It's okay to say that, by the way. We're not saying anything. Okay? Wow, not as many as I thought, about 7 or 8. All right. It's a smaller group. They fund the hopes of new venture organizations. And what we'll say is these two are actually very different. But one thing they have in common is we love these customers because they're not as demanding as other customers. There's at least 2 points of view, or 2 points to make on this, that really talk about who these people are. The one that's wonderful about these people is they don't expect a complete solution yet. What we'll call an 80% whole product. Basically, they know the world is complex, and if you're going to launch something into here, you can get away with what we call an 80% whole product. What does that mean? It means the product's working, but maybe support isn't fully baked yet, or the applications aren't fully ready yet, or the references are lacking, which are part of the whole product. These people will buy anyway. Here's the danger. We succeed with these people with a fairly good but not robust whole product, and then we go, now it's time to go into the main marketplace. And so we knock on the door of customers over here, and we think, man, we're going to scale this thing now, but if we don't have what we call whole product, what's the reaction of customers over here? They're going to say, could you please come back like in a year or two when you actually have a real story for me? Like references, like applications that actually work, like easy to deploy solutions, etc. You go, what? Wait, did the market change? No, the market didn't change. This group here is a much different group than the market over here. And so what we can say is there's a wall that we'll be describing in a little while in much more detail. And this wall here, we call this the whole product barrier. And it means only whole products are allowed through. This is what Apple did with music, with iTunes, downloadable music at one point, that was part of the whole ecosystem that allowed this thing to get in the main marketplace. So this wall only lets good ideas and full whole products through. So I'm doing a program a couple months ago for a bioscience company, and one of the people in the room is a scientist, and he says, I think I know what you mean by this whole product barrier. Michael, is this a semi-permeable membrane that allows certain molecules through and rejects others? You go, yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think of my biochemistry many years ago. And that's it. It's a very selective piece, and it only allows the whole products through. And we'll describe whole product in much more rigor in a little bit. But the most important part of this life cycle stage here is the group that really resides in this early majority. And these people we call the pragmatists. And they're the ones that matter the most. We like them all. They're all important. But this is a group that represents about 35% of the overall addressable market. They are part and active in two stages. One is they're the ones that will adopt initially and allow segments, applications, with types of customers to adopt first. Apple launched the wristwatch. It's still kind of in the process of being launched. Is that a wearable technology example? Because wristwatches aren't new, but computerized, connected, IoT type of wristwatches are relatively new. I think Samsung has one too. Where would you put wristwatches today when it comes to the IoT, web-enabled, et cetera? Do you think it's in Tornado right now? No. If you opened up newspapers, magazines, and around on the web, all the chatter makes it sound like it's in Tornado, because there's a lot of talk, but there's not much use yet, not much application. Do you have a suspicion about what the first segment might be that might actually allow the early adopters to segue over into the main marketplace for wearables? Do you think it would be business executives? Do you think it might be nurses? Do you think it might be sports enthusiasts? Do you think it might be people who have to be monitored for their health on a regular basis? Could be any one of those, but we would argue that there's always one ignition point that allows a certain segment to actually drive this beginning point in the real marketplace. And we actually have a way to measure. There's 9 factors, 9 variables that we use to assess and help our clients with finding what the heck is the first segment, what we call the beachhead, that's going to help us drive this into the main marketplace. If you were a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout growing up, I wasn't, but I hear they learned this, so I'll mention it, is do you remember the idea about starting a little fire to create, some s'mores, whatever the heck it is you do when you're a Boy Scout or Girl Scout, and you're cooking outdoors, and the notion is, I want to get a big fire going, so I'm going to get a really big log, and I have a book of matches, I'm going to light that log, and man, when that gets on fire, it's going to be great. That's like trying to get to Tornado right away. It doesn't happen. What happens if you try to light with a whole book of matches a log to get that big fire going? What do you end up burning? Matches. Ouch. You use the matches, you might singe your fingers too. The idea about kindling, about getting some fire started with some ignition point, that's what the beachhead segment is about. And so these 9 factors, we've developed a methodology over the last few years, actually the last 5 or 6 years, that says there's 9 factors, each one, a perfect score in each one of those is a 5, and there's 3s and 1s. And basically, right now with the team I'm working on in online education for architecture around that, basically what they're looking at is their goal is to get those areas and that score up to 37 out of 45. And that if you can get to a score for a segment of 37 out of 45, you've got an 80 to 85% probability that you can hit that market effectively. So what are some of those factors? One is, fairly obvious. Does the customer have some money, and can we reach these people? 2, do they have a real pain point? Turns out, these people are psyched to try new things. These people actually don't want your new stuff. Their life is pretty good right now without it. Putting things into the cloud around medical and financial information? I don't think so. We want more secure things than that. These people will only adopt because the pain level is high enough in their current broken mission-critical process that they're going to want to change to something else. So could it be sports enthusiasts for wearable wristwatches and IoT technologies that say, I want to monitor and be able to very much compete with my friends who are also running and working out and maybe checking out who is doing what, or medical trachees that need to be in constant contact with a hospital, maybe for cardiac conditions. At some point it may go viral, but at this point it's going to be something else. So one of the companies that I worked with many years ago, actually about 12 years ago, was Philips Medical. And if you know what an AED is, an artificial external defibrillator, we did the process of rating, ranking, and scoring around that. It was about a $3,000 device 12 years ago. And these are the ones that if somebody has cardiac arrest, you put this on, you hit a button, and it's going to bring somebody back, basically, without having to do any other kinds of medical attention. And so we did a list of potential possible segments that could serve as the bowling pin, head pin to go after. Because there were some people already using this, and remember that Philips, their goal with these AEDs was we want eventually, and they're not there yet even, every place where there's a fire extinguisher in a home or an office, we want an AED nearby too, that allows somebody, if they were in medical duress, to get help. So we went through all sorts of listings around who the possible segment was. One was, I'll never forget, it was rich guys, middle-aged or above, on yachts who have heart problems and might see this as a nice way to save themselves if they're out there with their friends or girlfriend or whoever might be out there on the boat with them. That was an interesting one because they have money, right? They got a problem. But I was thinking to myself as we did the scoring. That one scored, by the way, a 22 out of 45, which means you're pushing rope on this one. There's a problem, but who's going to give this person this as a gift? Here, I think this would be a really nice, you're looking a little weak these days, so let's try this out. The other problem, if you don't use it properly, you can actually cause permanent comatose conditions for the patient, which is not such a good outcome either. By the way, you wouldn't like that, I wouldn't like that, and the insurance company sure as hell doesn't like that, right? Because then it changes their whole business model too. Eventually, you know what this was? This was actually airlines, major airlines, United, American, and Delta, who, according to FAA regulations, if somebody had a cardiac arrest, a serious medical condition on an airplane from Atlanta to Detroit or wherever else, they were required to land at the nearest airport to seek attention to help this person survive their cardiac problem. So two problems occurred with that. Well, one was the individual. Two was they'd have to dump fuel because you can't land with a plane with full fuel. And three, be inconveniencing 250 other passengers, whatever it is on the airplane. And so all of a sudden, Delta, United, and American saw this competitive advantage to say, we love our customers, but we also don't want to inconvenience the ones that are not under cardiac duress. If we could train the people on the aircraft, the flight attendants, to use these AEDs, this would be a way to save on fuel, on time, and still rescue the person as needed. So that was the first bowling pin here. And then a regulation was put in place for U.S. markets first that said all responsible airlines need this. And now what have you seen? It's actually moved to airports. Have you noticed that? Every 300 meters, there's another AED in airports behind glass. And then there were private corporate jets and other health clubs, workout fitness places. So these are all bowling alleys that are going through. Why? Because they scored a reasonably high 37, 39, 41. And so we'll show you the metrics later for what those look like. It turns out that the typical marketing strategy in many companies that we begin working is we understand this, Michael. I know what this should be. This should be the largest, the biggest, hairiest, mother of all segments, and that will spawn the tornado. And the answer is it rarely does. If you can find a moderate tornado, a moderate bowling pin, that'll grow you into tornado faster if the pain level is high enough for the real business process, consumer process, etc. In fact, later, I'm going to challenge you here in the room to say, can you find an example of a product that actually went in the following vector? That said, hey, Michael, this idea about bowling alleys all well and good, but we don't have time for that stuff. We're in the early market right now. We want to do this. We want to go from early market, have a couple quarters of experience, and then scale it into the main marketplace, into Tornado. That's what our strategy is. Our experience out of 500 examples is, we call that delusional thinking, because it never happens. We can hope it, we've seen forecasts around it, but it doesn't happen. In fact, every single technology has to earn its way through what we call the bowling alley before it gets to the main marketplace, and the Chasm book has easily 25 examples in there from the work that we've done in the past. Even things that presumably didn't have a bowling alley first, like digital music with Apple, had a bowling alley. It only lasted 12 to 16 months, but it was a bowling alley first. You all now in your smartphones, it's been replaced, iPods, others by your smart devices. But early on, do we know what this segment was that actually focused on? In 2001, 2002, it turns out that 80% of all iPods sold in those 2 years were bought by one demographic. And it wasn't grandparents listening to Frank Sinatra. It wasn't college professors. It wasn't new moms. Who was it? Kids. Close. Teenagers. Specifically teenage boys. Interesting enough, it wasn't teenage boys and teenage girls. It was teenage boys. And that's the group. And Apple didn't target them, but the customers found them. And if you did a survey in 2002 at the street corners in LA, or in Pacific Grove, or in Chicago or Boston, 78 to 81% of the people using iPods at that time were teenage boys ages 15 to 22. I know that's kind of an old boy, but 15 to 22, it takes us a while to grow up. Okay? And there were at least 5 parts of the value proposition that caused those people to be the initial target segment. Oh, by the way, there was plenty of digital music over here for early adopters. In fact, my business partner, Mark Cavender, is a colleague of mine. He's an example of that. I think you bought one of the early Rio products, the Rio Riot.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Where you had a project to do to even make this stuff work. It wasn't one button, it was maybe a couple weekends of work and so forth. And so the idea is that here, this is the first time it commercialized. So what were those 5 reasons? One is really high fidelity, high quality music, which wasn't the main reason for teenage boys. The second one was, on my way to school, I can look pretty cool walking to school with this iPod that nobody else yet has. Is that an important attribute for a teenage boy? If you don't think so, it's okay. It's just because you weren't a teenage boy right now. That's okay. You're past that demographic. Third one is, when I'm at home listening to music, my parents have no idea what music I'm listening to. Is that getting better now for teenage boys? Best one is the fourth one. When I'm at home, and I've got my earbuds in, and I'm hearing music, and my parents' mouth and lips are moving, I don't know what they're saying. It doesn't get any better than that when you're a teenage boy. Yeah, Mom, take out the garbage right. I don't think I quite heard you right that time. Sorry. We can joke about that, but that is actually part of the value prop. It moved from teenage boys, teenage girls, college students, Duke University standardizing on iPods as a way to communicate with their students in the graduate schools and undergraduate. And eventually, of course, within a few years, it went to Tornado. And now you do the survey in Pacific Grove or LA or somewhere else, and it's 80% of the people are not teenage boys, it's everybody, right? Who have digital music of one form or another, now streaming music and so forth. But that's how markets develop. And so what we're going to see is most companies don't have a clear, specific strategy for hitting that first beachhead, that first segment to go after. And so we're going to dig through that a little bit and talk about what we'll say is best and worst practices around this. Okay. So market development, if we think of the term and what it really means, it says that buyer behavior creates market dynamics in different areas along this path. And the reason we call it early market is not because it's a product that you're just deciding to work on now. If you're in a garage with 4 other people developing a new 3D printer or wearable technology or whatever, that doesn't mean you're in early market. It's if the category's in early market. Does that make sense? If you're figuring out a new breakthrough laptop computer or tablet, let's take tablet, and you've got a better idea than Apple or Samsung or anybody else, and that tablet is lower cost, better battery life, etc., and you're 50% along in completing that product. If I were to ask that team, where are you? They'd say, we're in early market, dummy. We're not done with the product yet. And my answer would be, you ain't in early market. Where's the category called tablet computing in North America on the adoption curve today? Is it early market? Heck no. With a lot of other mobile, it's probably in early Main Street today. What that means is the train has left the station, and you went on that train with that tablet, and you're not here, you're here with a 50% complete product. Is that a pretty dangerous place to be? Brands have been chosen, routes to market have been picked, winners have been anointed. There's not much room left for you there. So this is not about you. This is about what? The market and where it places the category. A lot of people will confuse the technology adoption lifecycle with what we call the PLC. PLC is the product life cycle. That's a great term. If you have it in your company, keep using it. Nothing wrong with it. But the PLC is different. PLC says we launch a product, we manage that product, we obsolete it because eventually we got a better rev, and a better rev, and we obsolete, and that's how it goes. And that's our version 5 of our new 3D theater development or financial software compliance work and so forth. This is us launching, us managing, or us obsoleting, and we get to the next curve and so forth. Is this the same as this? It's not. This is the technology adoption life cycle for customers. This is our PLC. There's nothing wrong with this, but don't confuse this. Who controls this? We do. We decide when to launch. We decide when to manage. We decide when to obsolete. But this thing, we don't manage it. We don't control it. It's the market. And we need to get and understand what the market is all about. Now, the good news is this is actually nested in here that are related in one way, and that is to say, if we think of new revs, typically the first 2 revs of any new product never even make it across the chasm. Smartphones, do you know how long smartphones were attempted to go to market with before they even were? It wasn't Apple. Remember Nokia in the early, 12, 14 years ago, the Nokia communicator, looked like a nice eyeglass case, was out. 12, 14 years ago. They were one of the first movers, but they were over here. It took probably the 3rd rev, maybe the 4th rev, and this is how, does that make sense? The world works in product lifecycle stages, but this is sub-hosted within the overall framework. And the fact that Nokia at one point had 80% share in smartphones never mattered. Because it was 80% of an early market, and nobody gives a darn about how you're doing there. How are we doing over here? That's the main marketplace. And so the key takeaways when we think of this world and the models and what we think about from a CASM standpoint is that disruptive innovations typically launch in the early market, but that's not the start. That's not the finishing point. That's merely the starting point. Continuous innovations often launch in the main marketplace over here. We call those something different. We call that +1 marketing. That's a better car with better fuel economy, better styling, a lighter laptop with longer battery life, those are all +1s over here on Main Street. Is a Tesla a pretty nice luxury electric car, $75,000 above? Is that a disruptive innovation that has to cross the chasm? Or is that a nice +1 on an already existing category called cars? No big deal, no big change in behavior, skill, or process, full speed ahead, so to speak. What do you think? +1 or disruptive? Tesla automobiles. +1. Disruptive. Okay. Here's the short answer. There's only one small difference in a Tesla and a supercharged gasoline-powered BMW. And that's the energy supply. The energy source is battery, electricity, versus fuel, internal combustion engine. And you might say, that one little thing, come on, that's a +1. No, it's not. The test about whether something is a true +1 or not is, it'll force it back if any of the following 3 things occur. Disruption is not just, is it cool or different, it's, is there a change in behavior, or a change in skill, or a change in process or workflow required to use this new technology. So behavior, skill, or workflow. Teslas. Any change in behavior, skill, or workflow? Yeah, I see some nods. At least 2 out of 3 of those are yeses. What might be an example of it? How about the support structure? If your Tesla breaks down on the 5, and you want to it's hard enough to get your Toyota or your other cars repaired properly, but a Tesla, most mechanics haven't even seen what those are, how to fix them. So one is repair. But there's a bigger issue too, which is power, energy. Right now, Tesla's working very hard at getting the LA to Seattle corridor lined up with recharging stations. But if you, like we live in the Bay Area, if you have kids and you drive it up to Lake Tahoe for skiing, and they're arguing in the back seat, the kids are, because it's a 4-hour drive, and they're having, a little bit of battle in the back seat, and you pull up and you get gasoline in your car, you go, kids, settle down, in 10 minutes we're going to be out on the road again. It's not a problem, okay? Use the restroom, get yourself something non-caffeinated, let's get back in the car and let's move on. You pull up in a Tesla, and you're going to recharge the kids. In 5 or 6 hours, we'll be right back. You don't want to be a parent in that car for that long. So there is a disruption to it. And it says it's an amazing car, but the recharging part is part of the whole product. It's not fully baked yet. It's getting there. They're working on it. The range is amazing. The turbo-powered accelerator in there and so forth. So can we conclude that electric vehicles have not crossed the chasm yet? We can't conclude that. We conclude that luxury electric vehicles on the open road have not yet crossed the chasm. They're here. Can you think of an example of an electric vehicle that's been on Main Street? That's an unfair question, I realize that. On Main Street for the last 30 years? Anybody here play golf once in a while? We have an amazing preference in the U.S., I'll include myself too, to do sports but not get too much exercise, please. That would be too much. So we drive on the golf course. They're called electric golf carts. They've been on Main Street for the last 25 or more years. But that doesn't mean electric vehicles all are. It means that specific segments of users are. And the funny part is all the stuff that's causing the movement in electric luxury vehicles on the open road to not make it across here are actually not problems in the golf cart. One is range. I can only drive 20 miles with this golf cart before I have to refuel. This is really a problem. Go get some golf lessons. 20 miles is a little too much to drive on an 18-hole golf course. That's one. Two is infrastructure for repairs. Do you freak out if your golf cart stops working? Get your mobile phone out, you call the front club guy, and drives out with a new car. The lack of acceleration in this golf cart is killing me. That's the point. They don't want you, spinning around on the golf. So battery life. In cold, sub-freezing temperatures, there's shrinkage on the battery life, right? Like you take a video camera out on ski slopes, you wouldn't know what cold weather is right here, I get that. But if you went on a typical winter now, and your 2-hour video camera battery goes to 1 hour before you can start filming because battery life gets exposed to cold and storage capacities drop. That could be a problem. Do you want to check in the morning to find how cold it's going to be to see how far you can drive in your new car? I don't think so. Go to the golf course. If it's sub-freezing, the odds are you might want to walk that day. Stay a little warm. Don't drive the golf cart. So this is a full product. The other example is if you fly to John Wayne Airport into LAX and you're running to your gate, there's another segment over here. There's at least 3 segments. And that's the internal people mover. Beep, beep. I don't know how those guys got a ride, and I'm not. But anyway, it's all right. Let them get to the gate. That's not diesel. That's not. It's a whole product for that. Okay, so electric vehicles, open road here, pure electric, golf carts, warehouse forklifts, battery operator over here, and then there's also something that's in the bowling alley right now. Some of you are driving that. It has a part electric component to it. What is that?
Hybrid.
Yeah, hybrid. Hybrid is half gas, half electric, roughly speaking. And pragmatists love hybrid products because they allow you to gain the benefit of the new breakthrough without totally giving up on the old infrastructure. You can still go to a gas station and get gas in a hybrid car. That's pretty cool. What we found is in half of our client discussions when we do strategy, a hybrid solution is actually a better way to approach the market than a full disruptive breakthrough if you want to get across sooner. So those are just a couple examples. The book does a nice job of really continuing on with much further elaboration on that. But don't give up. Please don't leave this room thinking that we just said plus ones aren't important. Plus ones are a great way to do incremental innovation on Main Street that do not require a change in behavior, nor a change in process, nor a change in skill. When Apple Mac laptops come out with extended battery life, nobody goes, oh my God, change in behavior, skill, and process. It's no. Instead of 5 hours, now I get 9 hours. Pretty sweet. That's a nice incremental. It builds loyalty. It gains market share. It allows profitable growth. But it doesn't cause a renewal strategy back. Oh, I should mention one more thing before we go on to the next slide, and that is this renewal discussion. Great companies know how to renew. Whether it's Oracle working right now going from on-premise software to cloud-based software, those are all renewal examples as we move through the adoption curve. And what we could say is that this renewal strategy, if you do it on purpose, we call it a renewal strategy. If you do it by accident, you call it an oh shoot strategy, or worse, if we weren't taping, I'd say something different. It's, oh shoot, we thought we were improving something, and we go all the way back to early market, and now our market is shrunk down to 10% and not 80% addressable market. And so if we think through the model and the adoption curve, remember that it's really about the category and not about you. And one of the greatest contributions you can make if you're working in either entertainment, or whether you're working in finance, or whether you're working in medical devices, or you're working in financial compliance, is for the category, where is that today before you try to set strategy? Turns out that every one of these areas, whether it's early market, chasm, bowling alley, tornado, or Main Street, it has the same 9 key factors for how to win in the marketplace, but they vary dramatically in terms of the details depending on whether you're here or here. So we'll get into that in a few minutes as well. There's kind of a neat matrix that we work with clients. We call it discontinuity analysis. That I won't spend a lot of time on this, but basically says, where do you believe your product or your category is today? And you can think of it simply as an X and Y axis. With A, B, C, D basically says, how much of improvement is there for the customer? So if you take something along the lines of 4C, which basically says it gives you dramatic productivity gains, but it's a major re-engineering, new systems required. This might be going cloud-based versus on-premise. That's not a tornado, as you can imagine up there. That probably says we're going to earn our way through and productize it and simplify it and operationalize it and all the things that are required. And so in this matrix, it helps you understand, and remember the list, you've got many different industries, that many of your companies are residing somewhere or in multiple places across here in terms of how big a benefit is to customers and how inconvenient it is for them to change this new infrastructure. How many people here in the room use Linux as their normal operating system at home? Okay, good. We've got a sane group here. Very good. Linux is amazing as an example because it's a great technology as an operating system. But it's a great example of something can be free, which Linux basically is, and still not make it across the chasm very easily. Although here's a hint. If free doesn't get you across, price cutting doesn't also get you across. So price elasticity here is muted. Later on, it'll be much better. But here in the chasm crossing, you go, I got a brilliant idea. Cut price by 20%. And that's going to get my wearable sweatshirt computer across the chasm. You're badly mistaken. If you take Tesla and drop that price by $8,000, you don't go to tornado. If you take Prius, which is in later bowling alley today, and drop price by 15%, you do get a bump in sales. Why that is elasticity increases as you move past the chasm at early bowling alley phases. And so basically on this slide, what we say is there's really a series of different places that reside. And these icons are for early market, bowling alley, tornado, and Main Street. And the example would be that for tornado, that's when something is a C, but a 1C. And just referring back to what we were describing earlier, a 1 says it integrates easily with existing systems, and a C says it gives me dramatic improvements in productivity areas where I routinely spend a lot of money and time or waste. That is a pretty easy adoption process, but almost no product begins here. That's a very rare animal indeed to see that through. And so if we think through the implications of that, what game to play? Have you been in meetings, maybe with other companies, not your current employer, where the CEO is in front of the room, and somebody asks at a coffee meeting, what's the strategy for next year? Would love to know what it is. And they say, our strategy is to grow at 30 to 40% next year. That's our strategy. Any other questions? Is that a strategy? Nope. That's an objective. And man, you might as well have the objective, but a strategy is how you're going to grow at 30 to 40%, not end of story, just go out and work harder. And the how part is who and what and why do we need to go to market with. And if you're in early market, it's typically an individual deal-driven event. In bowling alley, it's segment marketing, which means across verticals, segments, specific user groups, demographics, psychographics. And then later on, it goes to broader or +1 marketing. And I should mention something and not be remiss about this is the reason we call it bowling alley, you've read about it, I think, in some of your previous work, is the reason we call it bowling alley. It's not the most exciting sport, I get that. But the idea is you got to hit the head pin. That, I got a different idea. I'm going to hit the right-hand pin and see if I can knock off. No. You got to hit the one that's in great pain today. And then the viral effect is the adjacencies to hit into other areas. That's really the physics of bowling, right, is to hit those other pins. But the reality is, it's not as easy as that, because these customers, if they don't talk with each other, or reference each other, or have similar problems, or empathize with each other, then you don't get any connection. We made that mistake. I was working on some patient monitoring equipment, medical equipment about 12 years ago, and the head pin was cardiologists, and the next pin was radiologists. Turns out they're on the same floor, in the same medical center, across the hall from each other, and they're not a good reference for each other. They tend to not like each other. They think they each had the tougher time in med school. They don't have lunch together. They're their own tribe. So the odds are you don't get referrals going back and forth. Does that make sense? You're going to be very careful about what is and what is not an opportunity there. And I think, two of the executive guest groups that we have here with Altair Instruments and with the Wells Compliance, two very different industries, one on the medical side and the other on financial compliance and software. In both cases, it's finding those pins that are adjacent to really drive that demand into bigger markets is obviously a major part of what we need to do.